companies are more open to have those as mandatory regulatory.
Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us for this session. Thank you everyone to the people in the room, but also to those who are joining us via the live stream as well. So we're going to kick off our session today on the role of the private sector in unlocking biodiversity data. And we've got a great number of speakers for you and then a panel discussion afterwards. So I'm going to be able to introduce Julien Calas from the French Development Agency. I will then also be able to introduce Cedric Elabour from Biotope, followed by Tim Hirsch, the Deputy Director at GBIF. And then we'll hear from Stephen Dickinson, the Group Biodiversity Specialist and Senior Environmental Advisor at Total Energies. And then finally, we'll hear from our last speaker, Anne-Sophie Archambault, who is the Node Manager for GBIF France at IRD. So just to give you an idea of what the session will look like, we'll run for approximately 5 minutes as an introduction from me, just to set the scene. And then following that, we will hear from each of our speakers in turn, before we then come together for a panel discussion at the end, in which we will be able to take some questions from the audience, both in the room and also online as well. So why are we here and why are we talking about biodiversity data? Well, the need for biodiversity data has increased exponentially over the last couple of years. As we've been hearing this week, and I'm sure we will go on to hear in the sessions to come over the next few days, the need for us to understand our interactions with biodiversity, to prioritize where urgent action is needed, to plan interventions, and then also to track the progress and successes of those interventions once they're in place, is more important than ever. So this all will rely on biodiversity data. But the kind of data that will be needed may vary depending on what the actions are and who is going to be implementing them. So for example, national governments will be in need of data that will allow them to set and track national targets, to be able to develop strategic level spatial plans, and also to become and maintain their role as an effective regulator for various different other sectors. For NGOs, this will be a challenge that can be very varied, from individual species-focused interventions right the way up to global level prioritization of conservation priorities. But within the private sector, there has been an increasing and to develop a greater understanding of the impacts and dependencies on biodiversity. And actually, I think it's a really positive step for us to be in this position now where we have this great demand for biodiversity data. But the key step for us to address now will be to ensure that the supply is able to keep up. So what are the challenges with getting that supply into the right place? Well, while this demand is increasing, the data is not always. It can have a number of noticeable gaps. We can see here that data is not always available where it is needed. If we look on the right-hand side, we will see data from the Living Planet Index and from GBIF, showing that there are noticeable gaps within data, particularly within the marine realm. Although I'm sure for the GBIF data that Tim will address in a short while, this is rapidly updating, and this map from a couple of years ago is probably completely out of date now, so I apologize for that. We also may not have data on what we need to have data about, and this can be individual species. So we see here the percentage of each different taxa that has data available within the IUCN Red List. But it also may be in terms of whether we are interested in the state of biodiversity, the pressures upon it, or what its response is to conservation actions. It may not be available how we need it also. So data may not be coming in the right types of format to make it easily integrated into decision-making processes. And most importantly for this session, it may not be accessible to those who need it. And a recent study in Europe has estimated that only about 10 to 20% of biodiversity data out there is readily available as open access data. So we really need to make a change. And we think that the private sector has a huge role to play in this change. So companies are generating huge amounts of data, whether this is through environmental impact assessments, biodiversity baselines, their monitoring and evaluation, or through some of their additional conservation actions. There are huge amounts of data being generated about species, about habitats, and about ecosystems. And actually it's estimated that the average housing development environmental impact assessment now will run to 4,300 pages at an investment cost of approximately £15,000 per chapter of that environmental impact assessment. And for large-scale infrastructure projects, such as the UK's high-speed rail development, this can be 10 times as large. And as a result of that, it results in a huge financial and time contribution from the private sector in developing biodiversity data. So how do we actually unlock some of this data? How do we shift from being data hoarders into data sharers? Well, there have been a number of concerns by the private sector in the past. First of all, around a lack of infrastructure to actually get their data out. There's a huge amount of data that's locked away in reports and spreadsheets from consultants and site managers, and we need to find a way to get this out into the public domain. There have also been concerns around this being a time-consuming process. How much time is a company going to have to invest? How much resources is it going to have to invest to do this additional task that isn't at the moment required of them? There's also concerns around the loss of control of this data. What will it be used for? Will it be misused? And how might this potentially come back and influence the company? And finally, there's been a lack of incentive to actually go ahead and do this additional task that isn't being required. So we need to address these, and I'm sure all of our speakers who are going to come up in a moment will be able to talk about how they've begun this process of addressing these challenges. But we need to shift towards a world in which the private sector is data sharing. They're able to gain the reputational benefits that come with being a positive actor for nature, and also to increase the amount and quality of the data that's available, both for the conservation community, but also the companies themselves, in order to have a much greater and more accurate decisions made around biodiversity, and hopefully also at a lower cost. So this is why we at FFI are really willing and happy to be supporting this. And we've actually integrated technological development, including increasing access to data, into our 5 breakthroughs for nature that we are both calling for and working towards. We're looking for a redirection of technological development and deployment to actually protect and restore nature globally. We recognize that technology has had a significant contribution to the damage that we've done to nature so far, and now it needs to and can have a positive impact in restoring that nature. So that is why we at FFI are really happy to be hosting this panel. And at this stage, I'd be really happy to hand over now to Mr. Julian Callas from the French Development Agency to talk about the Data for Nature initiative. Julian.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Thank you to all for inviting me today. So I will try to speak about an initiative that we started a few months ago. It's quite new. Oh yeah, thank you. Oh. Okay. Okay. So this is most of it. So we started this initiative inside of EFD. EFD is a French development bank. So we are financing program from public and private. At the beginning, we were quite aware, and thank you, Leo, for the presentation, because you set the scene very clearly. We were wondering what, as a bank, we can do to try to unlock the data sharing. And we thought that we need to take advantage of the momentum that you are speaking about, Leo, also. The fact that there is more and more call for improved data sharing. I can refer to the G7 Environmental Minister Declaration, who is calling for better data sharing. There is a motion 077 from the current IUCN Congress, who is calling for better data sharing. There is also several, discussion, and perhaps someone will speak better than me about within the negotiation of the future global biodiversity framework of post-2020. There is a call to increase data sharing. So again, we were asking ourselves, what we as a bank can do to try to contribute to the effort in data sharing. So we made an assessment. By starting by the very basic of our work, which is to finance projects who can have significant environmental impact. And as every donor today, we are asking our clients to comply with safeguards, to implement environmental impact assessments. And we were saying, well, looking that most of these environmental impact assessments are most of the time today available in the public, but the data were used to prepare and to implement and even to monitor those environmental impact assessments are usually discarded or not available for future use and are not shared. So this is how we started to discuss with our partners. We made an assessment, an internal assessment about what could be the effect of EFD trying to invite our clients to share this data that they will collect anyway, so that it can be made available in open data for everyone, the researcher, the civil society, but by the way, even for us, for future impact assessment, and possibly also for the company to be able to report about what they are doing. Okay, so we are back on the, okay, thank you. So that was the biggest presentation with more information. So this is the, let's say, we wanted to take advantage of this. We were also very much supported by the declaration of the Equator Principle, the banks, the private banks who took some commitment to share the data through the GBIF. So we said, well, the private are starting to move, we need to move also. So this is where we started also to use this to convince our boards, our management. And with we contacted the GBIF, we started to discuss what needs to be done. Then I can, where is the, okay, okay, thank you. So we did this kind of assessment. So Leo, you put the scene already. This is the heat map of the data available in the world. So this is almost what you presented already. And it says almost the same. This is to say that for us, as a development bank working in Africa, Latin America, in Asia, but fully, when you look at the GBIF data available today, there is most of the time far less data available in this area, and this is where we need them. This is where we need them, as you discuss, even to discuss with the government, to prepare plans and so on, but also for impact assessments. So we said, well, that is strange because we are financing environmental impact studies in these countries. We are financing even research program in these countries, but these data, they are not available. So we made a very short assessment. We looked at what was the number of species occurrence published in 2019 on the GBIF in all the countries where we operate at the moment. And then we said, okay, let's be crazy, let's be fool. Let's imagine that all the data that we are probably collecting through the environmental impact studies are tomorrow published on the GBIF. And we were wondering, can we make a difference? And then this is what we saw in the map. This map showed that if we only, the EFD, which is a very small bank compared to the World Bank, to the other development bank in the world, we are only a small contributor. If EFD were publishing in 1 year all the data that are collected through environmental impact assessments, then we see that in some countries who are not yet very much engaged in data publishing, we are starting to make a difference. And I insist on the fact that these colors are following, the values are following a log progression. It's not an arithmetic progression. So really you can see that some countries really make a change. We remove the occurrence data coming from we exclude the birds because bird watchers are very good guys and they are publishing most of their data. But this is to say that out of the birds, where there is a lot of data already, then you see really a difference. So this is where we get the agreement of our management to say, well, if EFD contribute, then we make a difference in these countries. And this, what did we do? So we said, okay, we are the funder, we are not owning the data, but we are signing financing agreement with our clients. And these clients, most of the time, are financing a consulting firm, consulting firm to collect the data and prepare the environmental impact assessment. And what we decide is to ask within our financial agreement to have the contractor requesting or inviting the consulting company to comply or to commit to publish the data they will collect anyway to implement the environmental impact assessment. And this is the basic of it. And we try to assess the cost, and then we realized that in fact it was not that much of money. It's 0.7% of the cost of most of the environmental impact assessment. So this is where we think that this is our work to try to convince our client that 0.7% of the cost, even on loans or even on possibly on grants, this is something that we can share or we can finance. So this is the basic of the idea of the Data for Nature initiative, and this is what we try to do with the GBIF. We try to support them to try to have more data publisher. But then comes the question about, well, you are asking to the consulting company to do this job. So is it that much complicated? Is it taking too much effort? Are we good in the assessment and so on? And I would like to ask to Cédric, the colleague from Biotop, to tell us about what does it take for a consulting company to try to answer our request to publish the data when we have contract with clients who are using Biotop, for example, or any consulting firms.
Hi everyone, thank you Julien for this question. So is it challenging for Biotop to publish raw biodiversity data? I would say it's not a big problem for us for several reasons. The first one is that Biotop is used to collecting observation of fauna and flora in the field. Biotop is a consulting company that bring together the largest team of professional naturalists in Europe, and each year our teams collect hundreds of thousands of raw biodiversity data in the field. These data are about all taxonomic groups, and most of these data are collected in the framework of environmental impact assessment studies. And these data are collected mainly in Europe, especially in France, but also in Africa, in Asia, and in South America. It's not a big challenge for Biotop to publish raw biodiversity data, also because we are used to manage and process biodiversity data. We employ data scientists, GIS experts, and all our teams are trained to use GIS software, Geographical Information Software, Geographical Information System software. And at last, Biotop is used to publishing raw biodiversity data. Since 2018, Biotop has published more than 200,000 data on the Depobio platform, which is a platform set up in France to transfer all data coming from environmental impact assessment. And Sophie will explain it later. Julien explained previously that it was not a big cost and not a big work to publish biodiversity data. Oh, no, he explained the cost and working time needed to publish raw biodiversity data was insignificant compared to the cost and working time needed for all EIA studies. and um, we don't need to collect additional data in the field. We just have to format existing data. And we can also underline that GBIF can the data can be hosted by GBIF without any fee for the consultant and its clients. Even if the cost of publishing biodiversity data is low, it's a real job for the consultant. This job is made of several steps, and it requires skills and tools to do it. So in the framework, in the context of our study for AFD, we have made the list of the tasks a consultant should perform in case of data publication on GBIF. And we can distinguish one tasks that has to be done the first time a consultant publishes data on the GBIF. And this first task can be considered as an initial investment for the consultant who will publish data on the GBIF. These tasks are the following: learning of the GBIF publication process, also checking national regulation in the country where the data have been collected, and also registration as GBIF data publisher. And in this first part of the job, a consultant have also to adapt their process in order to be able to publish easily their data on the GBIF. And then we have recurring tasks for each study. And these tasks are about datasets formatting, metadata description, and datasets publication. Since 2011, Biotop has developed its own internal application dedicated to raw biodiversity data management. This application, called Shuriken, allow us to facilitate and secure our data management. This application, Shuriken includes two applications, twin application, one digital tablet application, and web application that we use on PC. And thanks to the digital tablet application, our teams can collect data in the field. They can digitize data in the field without any internet connection, and they can use taxonomic standards directly in the field, such as TaxRef or GBIF backbone taxonomy. When our teams in the field have finished their inventory, they can synchronize their data, and the data are immediately available to the project manager, who can download files formatted for data publication. For now, we are able to download files for Depot-Bio, but soon we should be able to download directly files for the GBIF, to publish data on GBIF. Unfortunately, all consulting firms don't have such a tool, and during our study for AFD, we discovered that there is a very heterogeneous processes and expertise level among consulting firms. We know it because sometimes we also subcontract field inventories to other consultants. And during our study for AFD, we made interviews of consultants, and we tried to make tests with other consultants. And we discovered that some of them had difficulties to publish data or to format data in the required standard. So There are heterogeneous methodologies to collect and process data among consulting firms, especially they don't use taxonomic standard, or they don't all use GPS to geolocate their observation in the field. And also numerous consultants have never heard about GBIF and its publication process. And some of them have also a lack of skills and tools to format and publish data according to the required standard. So considering these difficulties, we believe it's important to think about solutions that would facilitate data publication by consultants, and by the way would reduce even more the cost of data publication. And Biotop is ready to help GBIF to work on this subject. I have finished my presentation. Maybe Julian, you would like to add some word to conclude?
Yes. Yeah, so thank you, Cedric. And just to say that for us, that shows that possibly we can make a real difference. And now really we are at the point where we start to sign agreements with that kind of clause, asking the clients to invite consulting firm to publish the data. That will start. We are convinced that there is some trainings to be done, but I'm sure that Tim will explain that there is already a lot of tools to train people available, and I perhaps can pass the word to Tim. I don't, yeah?
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Julien, and thanks everyone for the opportunity to talk at this very interesting event here at the Congress. So I'm, oh, right, see if I can go in the right direction here. There we are. So I'm Tim Hirsch, I'm Deputy Director at the Secretariat of GBIF, based in Copenhagen. And what I thought I would do is just back up a little bit, because in this kind of event we've already had how many mentions of GBIF, but not everyone is familiar with what GBIF actually is and does, and it might help here just to give a brief explanation. So we are an intergovernmental network. Our members are essentially governments who've been around since 2001, and we operate a network and a data infrastructure. The overall mission is to provide anyone, anywhere, with free and open access to data about all species in all habitats. So there's no particular focus of where the biodiversity is from. We're a voluntary collaboration among members, and we operate through a network of what we describe as nodes. So they can be national nodes, institutions within countries or within organizational participants who help to bring together the different players in the country, the different stakeholders, to help with the sharing of data using common standards. This is a little bit small probably for the audience here in the room, but you can see on the right here, this is just today's version of what's on the homepage in GBIF. And you'll just see from the numbers at the top there that we're dealing with quite large volumes of data. So we're currently at just under 1.9 billion individual species occurrence records that are being brought together from just over 1,700 data publishers or institutions sharing data from a little over 120 countries around the world. In terms of what is the value, what is the actual function of what GBIF does, we are not out there collecting, finding the data. We act as a way to bring data of many different types of origin together for onward use. So you might describe GBIF in a sense as a window on evidence that's collected from data of many different types of origin. So we're talking about natural history collections, the vast volumes of data that come from digitizing historic and current collections, observations, surveys, monitoring of many different kinds, including citizen science, including, of course, surveys for environmental impact assessments. Literature, machine observations, which can be from satellite tracking of animals, from camera traps, acoustic monitoring, anything like that. And increasingly, and we've heard about this at another event organized by Nature Metrics earlier today, eDNA, environmental DNA, which is an increasingly important type of evidence which is going into this body of knowledge that GBIF helps to curate. But the important thing is that all of this diverse evidence, while starting in so many different kinds of format, through the use of common standards, can be expressed into a single knowledge base that can be accessed and searched from one place. So it's an efficient way of bringing this diverse data into broad use. And in terms of the use, once that through the standards we're able to index the data and serve it efficiently through to users through the GBIF infrastructure, it's then available for onward use into science, into assessments such as IPBES, indicators into the CBD, and of course IUCN itself. And we actually did a calculation just a few days ago, noting that we were able to track 13,000 individual red list assessments that were citing use of GBIF in those particular species assessments. So it's a very significant source of the raw data that helps to go into that type of assessment. And then in terms of looking at, well, where is the value of having access to that data? Well, a lot of it, and we're doing this largely through the tracking of literature and citations of data access through GBIF. As you would expect, a lot of it is related to conservation, protected areas, threatened species, invasive species, etc. But you also are seeing uses relevant to other parts of the sustainable development agenda. So, for example, on food security, biodiversity data is very important for information about the distribution of crop wild relatives. Lots of aspects of climate change, how are species distributions modeled to change based on different climate scenarios, and what are then the implications for adaptation strategies. And of course, extremely topically now, human health. How are the distribution, how does biodiversity data help understand better the distribution and likely changes of distribution of vectors and hosts of human diseases. So that value of sharing that raw data actually goes well beyond conservation. So engaging the private sector is something we have been doing for quite some time, as Stephen will attest to. We will hear from him shortly. But recently, I think we have really had more traction than we have in the past in genuine accelerating interest and understanding of the benefits and the importance of sharing data. So apart from the Equator Principles, which Julien already mentioned, extremely important development that the financial institutions are now given a direct recommendation to encourage the sharing of data. We've been working with the professional bodies through the IAIA, the International Association for Impact Assessment, to work on guidelines for what are the practical steps needed, the kind of thing exactly that Cedric was outlining for consultants to follow good practice in sharing data. And then we had a project recently that was a collaboration between several of our national nodes, including GBIF France, GBIF Spain, Colombia, Norway and Portugal, who were looking at what's the best way of engaging the private sector as a set of stakeholders within countries. What are the challenges and the ways you can engage those companies to bring over the message and invitation, and we'll hear that in a moment, to the private sector to share data. And so that's been extremely valuable in bringing together some of these resources. I'm just going to finish my part by just giving two examples to perhaps give a little bit more of a practical illustration of what data sets can look like when they are shared from the private sector. So I'm taking this, and we could have taken many other companies, but Energias de Portugal, the EDP, the energy company in Portugal, has really, through collaboration with the national node, GBIF Portugal, taken tremendous steps to share a large volume of data from the studies it's carried out. So in total they've shared, and you won't be able to see this figure here, but it's 1.7 million occurrence records just from EDP's operations, 87 data sets. And again, much too small for you to see. What you can see, this little button here, is that we can trace 100 citations in the scientific literature of studies that have included use of data that's been shared from those EDP data sets. So you can really see that benefit and that the value of data sharing coming back in terms of the research it supports. Just very quickly running through these because it just gives a sense of the breadth and the depth of data that they are publishing. So this is just examples of the 87 data sets, which includes here, for example, vascular plant surveys, general ecological surveys, and even acoustic bat monitoring around the areas of their footprint. And then this is one particular data set which relates to vascular flora and habitats around the influence of one of their hydroelectric plants. So that's 220 individual occurrences. But moving further over to the right, the richness of this data is shown that they are expressing it in terms of individual samples. So they're not just putting it out as one flat data set of occurrence only. They're dividing up this data, in this case 220,000 records, into hundreds of individual vegetation plots where you can see here the list of species that have been registered in those particular plots. So it's a tremendously rich set of data sets coming from the private sector, which is adding really significantly to the data available, in this case in Portugal. And then just finally, another example, just to show, this is not just in Europe. Colombia, our node in Colombia, Sept Colombia, has been extremely active in engaging private sector actors in their country and offer very detailed and advanced help desk services to enable the sharing of their data. So that helps coming from the national node. And again, this is just one example. So this is a data set associated with environmental impact assessment carried out by Ecopetrol, I hope I've pronounced that right. And the striking thing about this, so this was survey data that comes from this area of influence here for oil exploration, I guess. Look at this star chart here. What that is showing is the taxonomic variety of the data that are being shared in this data set. And in fact, when I looked at the metadata, it actually covers 6 kingdoms. So it's everything from vertebrates, invertebrates, plants, fungi, and even down to bacteria and archaea. So it's a tremendously rich data set. And you think, well, this is in Colombia. How many data sets will we already have in Colombia with that richness of species observation? So I'm going to finish now, rather than just sort of telling the story in my words. I'd just like to play in a video that was produced by the project that I mentioned involving several national nodes, which gives voice to some of those in the private sector who've responded to this invitation. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Mi nombre es Gloria Perafán. Mi nombre es Pilar Segúndez Cámara. Me llamo Ferrorer.
Jørn Olav Løkken. Kai Andreas Hanvik.
Los datos de biodiversidad que generamos son registros biológicos, informaciones de especies ecológicas. También se produce activamente mucha información de biodiversidad, tanto para mejora de hábitat de especies existentes, como para hacer plantaciones que no estaban en la zona, o para reintegrar biodiversidad en las canteras a través de diferentes actuaciones.
I was the one who took initiative to start making data for GBIF. I'm generating a lot of species data on vascular plants, mosses, lichens, and these kinds of things. So we're trying to share that first and foremost.
We are publishing data from a very large area in the north of Portugal, and that overall data set contains everything from vegetation, animal species, aquatic ecosystems, habitats. So it's a very complete collection, almost in a 10-year span. So we have a lot of data and very complete.
GBIF tiene la ventaja de aportar información fuera del mundo académico, haciéndola más accesible a personas o instituciones que están fuera del mundo científico.
Es un escaparate muy bueno de los resultados que vamos obteniendo en la rehabilitación ecológica que llevamos en las canteras.
It's useful for others, and it's nice to have it documented in a proper way, and it's also a nice advertisement for our company.
The procedure isn't that complicated and that complex, and more data in the future equals better studies in the futures.
Overall, there was not much problem to start publishing in GBIF.
We have already used some of the published data in studies, so that was obviously the biggest advantage of using such a database. And we hope to somehow increase aqualog visibility by participating in this joint effort to make biodiversity data available to everyone interested.
Las propias empresas, no solamente desde las administraciones o los científicos, las propias empresas del sector privado también podrían beneficiarse de esta información aprendiendo tanto en su propio sector como en otros sectores aspectos de biodiversidad que pueden integrar y coordinar en sus empresas.
Los beneficios que ha visto la empresa de publicar los datos ha sido, digamos, el tema de reconocimiento bastante relevante por los datos e información suministrada. Yo pienso que es un tema de reputación interna y externa, el poder informar de lo que nosotros como organización estamos haciendo.
I think it makes sense to contribute. Like, we make money by being good consultants, and I think it's a way of being a good consultant is to encourage to contribute to this big data collection.
So if everyone is sharing, you probably have a better data source for doing good decisions.
Hoy necesitamos todos demostrar que somos capaces de hacer nuestra actividad de una forma sostenible. Y esto no es solo compatible con el entorno natural o social donde se desarrolla la actividad, sino también incluso para poder acceder a algunos productos financieros hoy en día tienes que demostrar que eres sostenible.
This is kind of a symbiosis. It's a win-win situation.
It's cool being part of something bigger.
So thank you very much for that, Tim. That was really informative, and also thank you to our first two speakers. I'd now like to invite Stephen Dickinson from Total Energies to come and talk a little bit about how they've been engaging with this process. Stephen.
So, hi everyone, nice to be up here, and thanks Leo and team for giving us this opportunity for contributing what I would call a very modest contribution in terms of what our journey has been in terms of biodiversity data sharing up to now. I'd probably start off by saying that data sharing in the company is not something entirely new. It's been done, but in a very patchy manner over a number of years through contributions towards scientific publications or ad hoc biodiversity reports, and of course upload to for example, baseline data that has to go to the regulator when we conduct baseline assessments. So that was the state of affairs until fairly recently. Then came in Tim, upon the invitation of the WCMC as part of the Proteus annual meetings back in 2015, I think, and he kind of opened at least my eyes on how important the biodiversity sharing process could be, and in terms of a possible contribution from the private sector. But I must say things stayed at that stage then for a short while. But clearly the business case was evident. The biodiversity data sharing as a business case could be seen as a contribution towards combating the loss of global biodiversity, simply because you're providing data that allows essentially at its most basic form of contribution a better understanding of global species distribution. Okay, but that's just one facet, but I would say the key one from my perspective. And of course, we as the private sector are highly dependent on that information. When you provide data to GBIF, it then gets picked up by a number of organizations and gets reprocessed in a format that is readily usable for operational use within our companies, like conducting biodiversity screening assessments. In particular, in the energy sector, we have a high rate of projects and portfolio acquisitions, divestitures, and so on. So we're in a high demand for understanding, where those sensitivities are, which are compiled because people are contributing to the GBIF platform ultimately. So with that business case at hand, we thought, okay, well, what do we do with this? And it so happened that very soon after this meeting, Total Energies embarked on the Act for Nature initiative. And this is a industry-led association called EPE. It involves NGOs too, partners. And the Act for Nature initiative asks member companies to sign up to 10 key common commitments for improving biodiversity management, and also allowed member companies to submit company-specific commitments. So that's when things went tick, and we thought, okay, this is a low-hanging fruit. Frankly, we, like Tim and others have said, generate huge amount of information. A lot of it gets shelved on our shelves or in the regulator's shelf, I must say. Not everyone has a depot bio systems in place. And so, yeah, it just made sense. We went back to WCMC, asked about GBIF, and is this the best choice? And they said, yeah, by far, this is the leading global biodiversity data repository, which you feed information to and then generates value by the compilation of all this information. So that up here on the screen is, just a glimpse of our biodiversity ambition, which was launched last year. It was a renewal of our previous program. And one of the key pillars is around the promotion of biodiversity, and that's where we associated the Act for Nature commitments specifically on biodiversity data sharing, which was specific to Total Energies, where we commit to share our biodiversity data to really, have a systematic approach in at least that's the ambition, to share information that we generate. But of course, being an energy company, we're cautious, and we said, okay, we're going to set a minimum threshold of X contributions per year, but it's a minimum. And we will report back on this, of course, through our normal disclosure processes. But of course, you can see the information that's been uploaded to the GBIF website if you type in our name. And it's a bit small, but you can see really, with the business case and the materialization of this public biodiversity commitment, we were set because we had a top-down approach. These commitments were approved at ExCom level. So, of course, when that happens, this makes our life much easier in terms of then mainstreaming the commitment and operationalizing it, which is important because our company is present in over 130 countries. We have 100,000 people in the company. We have numerous projects, but it takes time to really get this stuff to trickle down. So really we then embarked on a piloting phase to ramp up and get to where we felt we should be to actually honor our commitments. And so that involved foremost developing a GBIF aligned template. So others have explained the importance of structuring the information in a format that is readily usable and can generate value immediately. So that was an important step, and we couple that with a number of other actions like awareness raising within the company, embedded the workflow within our internal biodiversity training modules so that the newer generations of staff would know that this is waiting for them and that they could actively contribute to the contributions. And as part of the awareness program, we also were able to pinpoint some keen projects or sites or affiliates across the world where, having enthusiasm to want to share the data because there was a business case for them that they could leverage, of course, their contributions both internally within the company and externally too, of course, as the idea being that we're a respectable company and are willing to share this information, but also internally to show that they could be actively contributing to the group corporate public biodiversity commitments and the ambition at large. So we identified some of these, and so we were able to select some early data sets, and we focused on marine offshore, in fact, because we're heavily present there with conventional oil and gas developments, and but also with our future renewable offshore wind activities, which are also in a position to generate information. But really, we understood that there was a greater paucity of data within the marine realm, and that could add further value still. In parallel to all I've said, we also mainstream or integrated the approach within our company environmental rules for our new projects. So all our new projects are open to this biodiversity sharing process, but also integrated it into what we call our general specifications, which are the extension of our environmental requirements in our company rules for how we do projects, but for our contractors. So our contractors know now what's coming for them, and they will be doing the formatting. They may have subcontractors still. An environmental impact assessment firm usually has the opportunity to work with other external experts that will be doing the baseline data collection, the monitoring, and so on. So we wanted to make sure that this was cascaded all the way down so that it would make it an easier process for the data to get back up to headquarters, which is in charge of uploading the information on the platform. So here, it's very modest. We're not trailblazers yet, for sure. We're far from the 1 million data or species occurrence that you've mentioned, but here's just a glimpse of what things look like for us. So this is an environmental baseline data set for South Africa offshore. And you can see the number of sampling stations to which each species occurrence is associated to. So in there sits species information, but also more physical environment data on the type of benthos, for example, when we were looking at the benthic biodiversity. So the types of sands and so on, which is useful information to correlate species distribution with. And so yeah, just over 1,200 species occurrences with 3 country data sets. There's much more actual subsets that we've contributed, but it concerns 3 countries right now, all offshore, marine mammal and benthic information. We also chose that data because it's very expensive if you're a research body to go and obtain this information. The cost of chartering a vessel to collect that information is very, very expensive, maybe something like 30,000 euros a day. So that cost kind of disappears for us because we go out and do our exploration and seismic work usually and try and combine that. So we have the information. It doesn't come at that cost to us. If we were, it's just part of the overall process. But for me, more important than the actual species occurrence information here were the number of downloads of that data set. I was just astonished, 3,500 downloads. I was not expecting that at all. And in fact, that matches well with the data paucity issue, simply because that type of information is more attractive. So maybe a little recommendation, if you have to choose what data you want to share, try and share data maybe from areas where there's data paucity or extreme environments, which we're exposed to, deep sea or ultra deep sea information. You're 1,500 meters plus is hard to collect. You need the equipment, the gear, so it doesn't usually exist. So that's useful, and I'd say even more interesting for me personally than the downloads was the actual citations. And you can't read it here, but Tim showed some. Those 10 citations were really revealing in terms of the use and the variety and the diversity of use people downloading the information were actually making. So of course there was the usual stuff like species distribution uses, but it also spanned, they were using the data for a continental level species distribution for biodiversity information across Africa, using the ocean data also for understanding climate change impacts. They were using it to test georeferencing biodiversity monitoring information methods as such. So it works and spans in incredible manners, but also things like landscape analysis, habitat classification, mapping, and also big data reviews for biodiversity came up. So that was just in a small sample. So I can only imagine, if we contribute more, that this will expand as such. I'll just wrap up and with some key learnings very briefly, and I guess I start with the negative side first, so we can forget about it quickly. But the process was a little bit more challenging than we had expected. Not so much in terms of establishing the workflow, getting templates. That was the technical stuff which we could control. It was actually understanding who owned the data that was sitting in our archives. Because all the information I've showed here, apart from the South African information, is essentially historical data that we wanted to reprocess and open the vaults to give access. And really there, it was a cat and mouse chase. We thought we owned the information. Well, no, in fact, maybe it's the EIA company that owns it. Maybe it's the subcontractor or the expert who's collected it. Maybe it's the government. Usually it is the government in some places. So we had to clarify that. That took, in fact, the most of our energy within the entire process. And then when we pinpointed who was the owner, we had to get authorization, and ultimately that has to go back to somebody who's responsible legally within the company, the affiliate, because our organizations are constituted with headquarters. For example, TotalEnergies is a European registered company, but our affiliates are all different legal entities. So that's when things get tough and a bit complex and can deter people from making more contributions. But that can be overcome. Maybe in terms of recommendations, I would say really invest in piloting and giving yourself the time to ramp up, and that will make a better plan for you to then scale your contributions in the future. I think you should also think of allocating some support budget from external consultants that can help you panel beat information into especially historical data, because you're teasing it out of paper reports. Some of them are quite old, some more recent. Of course, that issue then disappears with the future data because of the mainstreaming in our company rules, and that we feel will not be such a big issue for us. Possibly also don't underestimate the role and support your country node can provide. The French Natural History Museum was a huge support. They helped us choose our licenses. They help us think about what our templates should look like. They help us also confirm that the template preparation was done correctly. They also have helped us actually conduct some of the uploading. So generally support and capacity building across the entire process to make things a bit easier. Maybe just one last point, choose your licenses carefully. We chose the most open and free use license we could. We felt that was acceptable. May not be the case for everyone. And maybe just a word of caution in terms of some hidden risks, and you alluded to that, Tim. Sometimes during our baseline or monitoring data, we come across species occurrences, species that are listed or prone to over-harvesting as part of the pet trade industry. So the tool allows you to associate a given area to your species occurrence, a GPS coordinate, and you can generate one that reduces the risk of very precise localization of the said species, so not giving its population or individual's location away. A frog collector could make use of that. So but still allow the association of the species occurrence in GPS coordinates to be readily useful from a scientific perspective. So yeah, I'll probably finish on that final comment and be happy to answer questions if there are any later. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen. So now I'd just like to invite our final speaker up, Anne-Sophie, who is the node, GBIF node manager for France. Anna.
Yes, thank you. Indeed, I will introduce you briefly the French National Dépôt Bio. Thank you. Because a few years ago, the Ministry of Ecology in France decided to created a new law, and they decided to launch this, and it's the law of August 2016 on the reconquest of biodiversity and landscapes. And of course, there were already a lot of observation data in the National Inventory of Natural Heritage, and these data were coming from more public institutions or NGOs or things like that. But they decided also that the private companies should share the data. And so at national level, the law was decided, and in 2018, the National Museum in Paris was in charge to develop the legal deposit service for this raw biodiversity data, and it's called Dépôt Bio. So it only concerns the data inside the French territories. It's not from outside the territories, just national ones. And since the launch in 2018, we can see that now there is already a total number of data in Dépôt Bio, which are more than 2.7 millions of data, which are available now on these Dépôt Bio platforms. And you can see in between the different years, and you see that currently in 2021, this year, we already have more than 900,000 data which were provided in Dépôt Bio. And the important thing is, so what types of projects you can find in Dépôt Bio? It was done for sharing all the EIA from France, and also monitoring studies. So it's all the data coming from consulting companies, and mostly, especially at the beginning, it's an analysis done after 6 months of after the launch of the Dépôt Bio system. And you can see that there was a lots of projects for wind farm companies, and also for photovoltaics. But currently, it's more or less the same types of projects and companies who are sharing data with Dépôt Bio. But I don't have the last numbers of percentage because the analysis is not done anymore for the moment. It will show up next year, I think. And so you see, it's about all mining, also transport infrastructures, and all of these kind of companies. And the important thing here is that inside these companies, there is big consulting company, but there is also a lot of small ones. Like Stephen said, there is a lot of subcontractors, and so it's not every time a big company. It can be a small consulting, and it's also working, and they can do this process. And also, what with this almost 2.7 millions of data, there is a lot of them who are where we discover new species in certain area of France where was not already referenced in the national inventory. So it was a good input from this data. And also for the endangered species or introduced species, we discover via this Dépôt Bio system a new introduced species in places where we didn't know before. So that's what was the positive points of this. And of course, this data will be published in GBIF. We are currently working with the Dépôt Bio platform to put them in GBIF. And so it should arrive soon, before the end of this year. And what can I say more? Yes, and of course, like already Julien and Steven say, we are at the GBIF nodes in France. We also help this kind of consulting firms if they needed to. And so also at the museum in my department, there is also people in charge of depot view who can help. So it's really, as they said, the first step can be a little bit longer, but after, once you did it once, it's really easy to continue. And most of the time we help for the first time, and after they did on themselves. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Anne-Sophie. So now, in a moment, I'm going to invite our panelists to come back up onto the stage, and we will have a short discussion. So I'd like them to come up now. But perhaps while they're just doing that, it's a show of hands to see if anyone has any immediate questions based on the presentations we've seen so far. Yes. So if you'd like to go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. There's informative presentations, and I'm in the Netherlands for our consultancy company, also looking into how can we upload our data into the national platform. I'm also coming across the cat and mouse game that Stephen explained about, like, who is owning the data. Is it our client? Is it ourselves? Is it the government? But the second thing I'm discussing about and wondering what you think about, if you collect the data for impact assessments and for permitting, then basically a year after you collected the data, the situation is different, right? Because there has been the impact has taken place, some mitigation, compensation, etc. Have you thought about that, discussed about that, and what is your advice on that?
Thank you for the question. So perhaps I'll come to Stephen first, and then we'll see if anyone else wants to contribute.
I'll just answer part of your question. Actually, it's not just baseline, so static information that's in there. There's monitoring, environmental monitoring or biodiversity monitoring. In fact, that constitutes, we see it's incremental, and the idea is, for example, on the Angola sites or in Denmark, where we've contributed information, you'll see the timeline as such. So you can see, how things evolve over time. So there's that aspect is, I would say, generally covered, yeah, or coverable within the way you can store information in GBIF. Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. Does anyone else have any additions to that?
Maybe to take up your second point, take this off, about you have the data and the surveys for the pre-licensing time for the assessment, but then things have changed. Well, I mean, I suppose the thing to bear in mind, of course, is that the data that you're putting into GBIF has temporal information as well. So it's not saying anything more than these species were at that location at that particular time. And so if, for example, if there is some post-development monitoring that's going on later, you can go back to the same place and you can put new information in GBIF about what species are there then, and indeed then what species may not be there. So I guess it's just to emphasize that everything that is in GBIF has a temporal as well as a spatial dimension, and so we have to be careful about assuming that this is all just going on to one spatial map and saying that those species are there. It's just giving information about where the species are at the time when the surveys were taken. I think, well, yeah, I mean, in terms of the ownership, I mean, I'm hesitating to answer that from the GBIF point of view, because that comes from the experience of those who are sharing data through GBIF, and particularly, I think, just hearing the experience that Stephen was talking about of, and I guess what will be really useful as we develop the materials and the resources to encourage data sharing from the private sector is if as much as possible of that experience that data publishers, that companies sharing data have had, and therefore to be able to provide some guidance and some advice about getting through these data ownership issues will be important. And maybe just one final point as well, is I think it also emphasizes that as systems are built up going forward, we need to do whatever we can to avoid that confusion happening in the future. So at the time when surveys are commissioned and contracts are drawn up, if the ownership and the licensing use rights of data are established at the time of the commissioning, that will circumvent those problems that you have later with a retrospective analysis, I guess.
Put that in the contracts.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think Stephen was speaking. I didn't know if if everyone heard, but yeah, it's about putting clearly the things in the contract.
Thank you very much for the question. I believe we have another question from this side of the room, so if you just bear with me.
Yes, thank you very much. My question is for Stephen. You mentioned that it takes time for biodiversity policies to trickle down to the collaborators. I suppose it takes time for this data to be entered on the platform. So my question is, have you encountered any difficulty in mobilizing your collaborators on that issue? I suppose this work comes on top of everything they already have to do. So that's a question for for you.
Is that for the entire panel? So perhaps I'll start on this side with Cedric. Is there a problem with mobilizing your collaborators and the people you're engaged with?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
Is there an issue with mobilizing the consultancies that are engaging with these companies and getting them on board with this process?
No, for us it's not a problem to go and collect data and to do it if our clients ask for it. So we are completely able to do it if they ask for it.
Yeah, I think you ask also the question about the time and the effort that you need to put in this, you know. So what we try to so that was a question that we asked to Biotop and to the consulting companies that we were working for us, and you know, we are still trying to figure out, but so far, you know, again, I think what we try to explain is that usually this is data that they have already collected. It's all about formatting the data. So according to what we understand and the test that we tried already, it's few days of work. Then there is the other questions about convincing the collaborators, training them, being able to answer the question. And this is the training that we are trying to do in EFD at the moment. So you have this cost also. But for the consulting company to just publish the data, if this is the questions, then it's really about, you know, having the capacity to format the data, using there is a lot of training material available at the GBIF already. The node as Anne-Sophie was saying, in fact, at least in France, but there is even a lot of nodes. The Colombian node seems to be very effective. So there is a lot of nodes all around the world was very helpful to do that. So it seems that it's not that much difficult, according to what I understand at the moment. I don't know, but you have more experience than us, so perhaps you set several, you know, hints so to take care. It's not that easy all the time.
Did we answer the question, or look, you know, it's not rocket science. So really, once you get your workflow in place, and that's why I pointed out that in parallel to doing that, when you kick off, you should try and identify some champions, people or sites or affiliates or projects that have an appetite for this. And we kind of know that because of the way we work and within, you know, our biodiversity network sphere. The obvious champions were out there, and those are the ones that have contributed that early data set. Then yeah, it does take a little extra work, but you know, in fact, if you've got the template in place, and that's not very difficult, things should tick along quite nicely because you've done most of the work, and for the consultant, when they're collecting the information, to put it in one format or another, it really doesn't change much. So I don't see that as a hurdle. But understanding who is the owner of the data is that, and that's why, you know, we've requested that we have these templates within the terms of reference of our consultants, so they know what we're expecting from them.
Thank you, Stephen. And perhaps just before we go back to the audience, I have a question of my own. We had a session here earlier in the week around multi-stakeholder landscapes and how there are multiple companies be operating in these same landscapes. What is the opportunity to use this data sharing as a starting off point to develop more integrated collaborations with some of these other companies? Perhaps I'll start with Julian. He's looking very excited about this question.
Yeah. By the way, so I don't have examples to answer that question, but we had a lot of discussion about this. I discussed with several companies in France who are actively involved in Depot Bio, and I cannot speak for them, but what I heard, what they were saying is that through the increase of quantity of data in some territories, even if there were competitors amongst the area, they discovered that in fact with more data they were more effective in demonstrating the impact, notably the questions of cumulative impact, which is a very, very sensitive and difficult question. And then they realized that in fact by sharing the data they were stronger in making the case about their investment, and in a sense even if there was competitors they were also gain for them, and they were more effective in the assessment. It's not my experience, this is what I heard, but I wanted to share because this is also something that we want to verify in the future.
Thank you very much for that, Julian. And I wonder, Cedric, is there also perhaps a role for the consultancies themselves to start facilitating some of this collaboration between some of the companies that you may engage with in these same landscapes?
Yes, I think that consulting firms have a role to play. They can encourage their clients to publish data and explain what are the advantages of publishing data. So we have a role to play also with our clients. And now we try to encourage them to publish the data, and we explain them why it's interesting for everybody and for their future studies also, because we can make easily the baseline of the studies.
Perfect, thank you very much. And now we have another question from the room here.
Yes, hello. I'm a colleague of Cedric, just so you know, and several points I perhaps wanted to react upon. The first one is actually directly relates to what you just asked, and I must say that in our experience of working internationally outside France, it's much easier for us to include data sharing on GBIF as part of, say, a biodiversity action plan once we've been hired to design that, than it is to try and negotiate new clauses that have something to do with intellectual property when, at the beginning of a collaboration with a new client, for example. Which means that we might miss the baseline step in terms of making that data available, but then we're in a better position to try and convince that the long-term monitoring might find its way into those platforms. That's a bit of a practical sort of experience. On the earlier question that was asked on how difficult it is to get people to do this, I think I would agree that once you've managed to set up a template that works, then any template goes. But when you're in situations where you have a lot of subcontractors, a lot of taxonomic specialists, and you have very big teams that are actually in the field collecting the data that sometimes are not very computer literate, and maybe are also in a position of scientific knowledge. They might be university professors, people who are not necessarily very receptive to new templates, and so that can take some work if you really need to convince these people that they can do the way they like to do it, but they also need to use this other method, and they need to do it on a computer, and so that's also an impediment. And I think we need to be aware of that, and certainly AFD, hopefully with your capacity building, you can make headway on some of those challenges. That's really important. I had another question, which is a bit of a cheeky question because it relates to a session that we are organizing tomorrow, actually, which is how do you manage taxonomic uncertainty in this setup, and how do you deal with the fact that the species lists or that people are using across the world, even in the same landscape, maybe people are using different species lists, and so you have these inconsistencies, and of course the species lists, they vary over time. And so what's your process for managing that? And if it is a big issue or a problematic issue, what do you think should happen to try and give ourselves the collective capacity to make those revisions and to update our capacity to do that?
Thank you. Perhaps I can ask for volunteers on the panel to start on that one.
Look, Fabien, we actually asked the same question to our node, and we said, what's the cutoff in terms of taxonomic interest? What's in terms of the hierarchy of the taxonomy? Do you only want species, the Linnean level, or genera, family is okay? And they said everything goes pretty much. It'll just have less value. And so, of course, we clean up the data sets in terms of duplication of names, try and get the more recent taxonomy names, but that's pretty much the deal. There's value in maybe what a purist would think is not a relevant piece of information, but we're also not necessarily going to want to go back and revisit the taxonomy as such, the data, if it's historical information, in fact. So, if it's benthos, then the soup that you've picked up is not there anymore. Most of the species occurrences are observational, so the information is what it is.
Yeah, just to add a little bit. As Stephen says, the taxonomic precision is as precise as you can get it. But if you can only identify an organism to family level, that may still be useful data if someone is doing a global assessment of that family. So, obviously you want to be as precise as you can, but only as you can in putting the data in. In terms of the taxonomic interpretation, and Sophia will probably may add something to this. Of course, this is a huge challenge of any data of this kind, and trying to normalize data in the kind of volumes that GBIF operates with. So, what the approach that GBIF takes is, we're not trying to decide between one taxonomy or another, but we have to work within a single, what we describe as a taxonomic backbone, which is the version that we are interpreting any name that is put into the system. We will do our best through the best references that GBIF assembles from many different sources to give a single version of what GBIF says it is, but we can still be able to show the name that was submitted in the verbatim record. So you will often find there are actually two names associated with the record. There's the name that's used in the raw data, but then based on the best backbone analysis that GBIF can put together, here is the interpretation, which means that species is then being put together with other records that are interpreted to the same name. Now that will never settle down into a perfect situation, and there are constant revisions and analyses and mistakes that need to be looked at. But that's the approach. You have a single backbone which will then, in principle, be able to interpret an old record which uses an old name, but still retaining the verbatim record, which might also, say, map onto a national taxonomy, which is different from what's used for the backbone.
For example, for Depobio, the national French platform, they use TaxRef, which is the national checklist, and they only have to check on TaxRef. But after, like Tim said, we do our best to use the catalog of life and the last taxonomic backbone. But sure, yeah, there is still question, but I mean, and I think there will be question during years again.
Yeah, and if you allow me, Leo, just let me be perhaps the crazy guy, or from our perspective, as the banker, as the money guy, you know. Okay, we will not answer from our perspective. We'll not answer the question. But what is the situation today? The situation today is that we are financing again and again and again with environmental impact assessment, where we know that there is this issue, but we don't have the agreement to finance more, to get the proper taxonomist, to do the proper assessment, to try to identify it. So the whole idea with this initiative is, first, let's try to share the data. Let's try to have more data available and then lower the cost of the basic information, so that we, as the bank, we will really invest in more identification, and there we will invest in taxonomy, and there we will invest in taxonomist experts, so that as soon as we start to identify species where there is an issue, and it will be much more, evident with more data available, then perhaps we could invest with the client about saying, well, okay, we have the basics, and then we can spend more time with taxonomists to try to know about what is not known yet. But it's for tomorrow, perhaps 10 years. Yeah, you're right. So I don't have the solutions, but I think we need to first to do the basic job to answer your question.
Thank you very much, Julian. And I think now, as we come to the end of the session, I'll just hand over to Laura to read out one of the questions from our online viewers.
So we've got, a number of years ago, our project to make publicly available the many years of EIA information created under US law was told that environmental consulting firms that are hired to produce the EIA reports consider their libraries to be a business asset and not something that they would be willing to share, even though it's public information when produced. Have you encountered this kind of proprietary approach by private firms as a barrier to their cooperation? And if so, how was this overcome? And then they finish their question with, great presentations, this is highly relevant to our work.
There you go, a very difficult question followed by a compliment at the end, so there we go. Perhaps we'll start at this end again with you, Stephen.
You know, I think the answer is pretty simple and straightforward. It depends what you put in the contracts with your lawyers. So when things are clear from the start, there's that issue is no longer a hurdle now.
Yeah. In fact, yeah, I will not ask. We have the same position in a sense. Huh? I think, if I understand well, the question is also about, there is a difference between, using previous collected data, where there you have usually this problem that was not very clear at the beginning, and then it's quite time-consuming, as it was very clear from Stephen's experience. We believe that if we are clear enough from the contract-by-contract approach, then perhaps it will be much more easier in the future. But so this is why we are perhaps not solving again the big question, but we think that there is a space really to make a move for the future.
Yeah, I mean, just to say, this is certainly an issue you hear about a lot, and sometimes it's the fact that a consultancy will say, oh, we would absolutely love to be sharing this data. We're professionals, but there's a confidentiality agreement that we can't break with our clients. So then the question is, how is it possible that you can have confidentiality agreements on what should be public goods data? And on that, and I'll just finish with this, I think that the role of the regulator can be extremely important there. If, as part of the licensing process, it was made clear that part of the conditions of licensing is that the data going into the EIAs has to be public, well, then you can't have a confidentiality agreement. So I think the role of the regulator is very important here as well.
Thank you very much, Tim. So we're coming to the end of the session, and I'd first of all like to thank all of our panelists for being involved. But before we go, I'd just like to finish on one final question with just a single sentence or two on what you think is the thing that's going to really help scale this up. Despite some of the modesty of the panel, you guys are leading these efforts. How do we scale this up so this is becoming a mainstream thing for businesses to do? And I'll start on this side for a change, so Cedric.
How to scale this up? maybe we can, maybe GBIF could develop some tools adapted for consulting firm, especially for them to publish data, because most of them don't know the JBIF and the format they have to use, and maybe if you developed specific training for them, it can help them to publish some tools, or maybe national checklist also with all species for each country that are known. They can use this checklist to make their inventories and use the right name when they work in the field, and then it will be easier to publish the data, I think. So.
I think more than a scale-up, I could say that to answer one of your questions, it's one working with a lot of different people, researchers and private companies. They always told me that they were thinking that sharing their data will be more difficult than the reality. And I think this is really important to let understand, and as you say, Cedric, showing more trainings and things like that, but realizing that it's not so complicated.
I guess I'd sum it up by saying it's buy-in from business, finance and government, that as long as you have those drivers and it becomes accepted normal practice, then it will scale up.
This is a very important question. I will take some time for me. No, I will try to be short. But really, I would like to take this opportunity to say, well, there is a lot of discussion all around here in the Congress about, at the moment, how finance will try to tackle the post-2020 global biodiversity framework goals. There is a lot of discussion about metrics for finance, for companies to have, some metrics about the impact and dependencies about biodiversity. All these metrics that which are spoken about all around are using models. They are using, knowledge. They are using what we call, I'm sorry in English, the function, the damage function about pressure and the impact on nature. That needs data. So to answer your question, I think that if we are serious with the finance institutions, if we are serious with the policies about, asking for finance to reach the goals, I think we have a great capacity to accelerate the call for publishing data, using data, creating the metrics, and with the metrics being able to reach the data. So it's a whole effort. So this is why I really believe in this initiative as part of the bigger effort, but it's really a way to scale up if we really are able to make the case with the other initiatives which are going on. And I really believe that the finance is a key player in these things. This is not a taxonomist and biologist issue. It's really about knowledge and knowing where to invest and where to report also for the people who are investing in protecting nature, being able to report about what are the results of all the efforts that we are doing together.
Yeah, I think for me the word would be demonstration that it's doable, and you can scale up. We can work with our industry association. I see Mark in the background, and we influence each other. It's not my idea to do data sharing. I picked it up from someone else. So we have to remain humble and try and pass that on and scale it up, because we're beneficiaries of this information. Like I said, we use it in our work processes. So I think it's maybe for some companies the issue of fear is there still, that things could backfire if the information is used in the wrong way or in a negative manner. So, but that's just the way it is. So up to companies to determine whether they want to take that risk. I'm not going to call it a risk, actually. If they want to get, expose themselves to that, I think there's more benefits. The benefits outweigh it for the companies anyway, by far. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much in summing that up. And I think that is two of the key things that we shall take away there is, first of all, that we need to demonstrate that this is doable. And also, as Stephen has said throughout this, check the contracts. So I'd just like to ask everyone now to give a round of applause to our panelists before we close. And we'll just finish now with a short video from GBIF.
Oh.